Parade magazine last week in last Sunday's paper had a very interesting cover story, dogs versus cats. And I don't remember all of the categories that they compared the two, but I do remember one, the category of which is the smartest. And I'm sorry, cat lovers, but dogs won that category. And they were sharing a number of different studies that were used to come up with this. And one of them was they found that the average cat can distinguish somewhere around 35 words, whereas the average dog can distinguish 165 words. And the smartest dog, a border collie named Chaser, is in the Guinness World Record book. He can distinguish over 1,000 words, 1,022. And they said that that's equivalent to a 3-year-old child. And I've always been impressed by smart dogs, in particular border collies, and I was reminded when I was reading this of something that I saw downtown a number of years ago. I think I shared this with you before. A man was training his border collie for an upcoming Frisbee competition and was doing all of these neat tricks. And after they were training, he brought the dog forward and he had a treat for the dog. And he put the treat in front of the dog, but the dog would not take it. The dog waited for the command from his master. Not only did the dog wait for the command, he wouldn't even look at the treat. It was as if the dog knew that if he looked down and saw it, then, that's it. Temptation would be too overwhelming. And that dog kept his eyes fixed on the master until finally the master gave the word and then the dog gobbled it up. But it's that image that I want us to think about for today's gospel. Keeping our eyes fixed on the master. For this particular gospel, I'm reminded of how now Jesus was walking on the water, and in the storm of all of that, the disciples saw Jesus, and they were incredulous. They couldn't believe what they saw. They were afraid. And Jesus said, "Don't be afraid, it is I." And what did Peter say? "Lord, if it is you, then let me get out of this boat. Command me to come to you and walk on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." And so Peter gets out onto the water. And at first, he's walking on the water until his gaze on the master moves and sees the waves and feels the wind and the splash of the water on him. And so his eyes look down on the water and he remembers people can't walk on water. And he begins to sink and cries out, "Save me, Lord." And Jesus says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Matthew's gospel is teaching us two very important lessons here. The first one is that lack of faith is not just about the sinking. It is the sinking. It is taking our gaze off of the master, being distracted by other things and following those things. Lack of faith is about the sinking. But even more than that, lack of faith is about getting out of the boat in the first place, about wanting to walk on the water. What did Peter say? "Lord, if it is you, then let me get out and walk on the water. It's not enough that you say, 'It is I.'" And then the other thing that Matthew is teaching us, very important, is that Matthew is not saying, if Peter had enough faith, then he would have been able to walk on the water. He wouldn't have sank. The message for us is the same thing. It's not if we have enough faith, we too will be able to walk on the water. We too will be able to overcome all of our obstacles in a spectacular way. That's not faith. Lack of faith is not about these things, of being able to do this. Faith, my friends, is about daring to believe, even and despite all of these things. Faith is about daring to believe, despite the obstacles, despite the challenges, despite the difficulties, despite the wind and the waves and the storms of life. Faith is about daring to believe. It's not about, Lord, if I have enough faith, I will be able to overcome my illnesses. If I have enough faith, I will be able to not have these accidents in my life or overcome my accidents. Faith is not saying, Lord, give me enough faith so that I can overcome whatever the problems are in my life because I have financial difficulties or a problem child. That's not faith. Faith is overcoming these storms of life despite that. I remember visiting a couple once. She had a terminal disease. And her husband was taking care of her in the home. And he did some very creative things. You know, she was in bed, and it was very exhausting to go from the bed to the bathroom. And she was only a wisp physically of what she once was because of the disease. But her husband would he would kind of hum a song that was one of her favorites. And he would pick her up because she was so light. And she had that gown, a long gown, slippers on her feet. And he would put her close and have her feet on top of his feet. And then he would hum this song as they would go to the bathroom. Take care of her needs, and then bring her back. And he had many creative ways like that to show his love and also to preserve her dignity. And it wasn't long after that that she couldn't get out of bed anymore. Because of the treatments and all of that, she only had a few strands of hair left. But that didn't matter to him. He saw the beauty. And then she said something very revealing. She said, you know, this is the happiest time in my life. I have Jesus, and I have my husband. My friends, faith is not about walking on water. Faith is about believing, daring to believe, despite our difficulties. Daring to believe, despite the obstacles. My friends, as we come together this morning, let us ask the Lord to give us that grace to dare to believe, despite the things of life. Dare to believe.